Good evening. My name is Craig Stolte, and today I'm going to be completing my FTT 104 Gunsmithing Tools Lab. The final assignment, which is the detailed stripping of my Panther Arms AR-15. Today's date is February 19th, 2023, and we'll just get started. So the first thing we want to do whenever we're handling a firearm is we want to ensure that it's clear of all live ammunition. So you remove the feed source, which is the magazine, set it aside. Pull the charging handle to the rear. Visually inspect and physically inspect the chamber to make sure that there's no live rounds in there. Release the firearm, or release the charging handle, and the weapon is clear. The other thing you'll want to do is check the work area to ensure that there's no live ammunition. So we check our drawers, check the top of our desk, of our table, and I'm satisfied. So, talking about the detailed stripping of the AR-15, the first thing we're going to do is field strip it. So when we're field stripping it, you can use a pin or you can use your fingers, but you will pull the retaining pin from the upper and the lower. Figures. All right, should be able to just get that with your fingers, removing the lower and setting it aside. On the upper, you're going to pull the charging handle to the rear. This is going to allow the bolt assembly and the charging handle to come out. All right, so when we're talking about detailed stripping of this firearm, a couple things that I want to note is obviously I would take off all of the accessories. But the custom floating handrail that I have on this does require a specialty tool to remove it from the upper. I do not have that tool. However, what I would do is I would remove these two retaining screws, pull those out, use the specialty tool to remove the handrail, giving me access to the gas block and the gas tube. Also on this is the forward assist button. On the forward assist button, there's two pins in there that I have had issues trying to get out and getting everything lined up. But if I had the knowledge, I don't really feel comfortable removing those again because I might not get it back together. So that's the upper. I will set that aside. And we'll talk a little bit about the lower. So on the lower, back here, you have a retaining pin that you can press down, allowing the buffer tube and the action spring usually just to slide right out, removing the buffer and the buffer spring and setting those aside. Now, for the safety and the trigger mechanism on this AR-15, I'm not going to take it apart again because I had a lot of trouble getting it back together last time due to the springs. However, I will talk my way through it. So the first thing you'll do with this is remove the pistol grip using a Allen wrench. There's an Allen key bolt down in here. As you take that off, though, there is going to be a retainer spring. There's going to be a retainer spring and a pin inside here that holds the safety mechanism in place. So as you're taking it off, you need to be very careful and set those aside. After that, then you should be able to just manually pull the safety selector switch out. By doing that, that releases down here to where you can take these two retaining pins out, spring retaining pins. Then you could pull the sear out, the hammer out, and the trigger mechanism out. Getting that back together is quite difficult for a novice like myself, so I'm going to just explain my way through that. Also, there's a specialty tool that removes the buttstock and the buffer spring tube. I'm not going to do that, but because I don't have the right tools. So setting that aside, we're going to talk mostly about the bolt assembly. In its current form right now, this is the field stripped. However, to do a detailed stripping, what you would do is remove the firing pin, retaining pin. And sometimes if you can't get your finger in there, use a punch or some other needle nose pliers and get underneath of it without bending it, and it pulls right out. So once that's out, put that into the magnetic bowl. Keeping your finger on the bolt, turning it upside down, giving it a tap, your firing pin should come out. Always give it a good wipe down before I put it into the bowl. Once the firing pin's been removed, you can turn the cam pin horizontal to the bolt carrier and lift up and remove that. And then once that's removed, you can then pull the bolt out of the bolt assembly. The bolt assembly has the extractor on it. So if you put a little pressure back here where there's a spring, there's actually a retaining pin in here. And if you just push on that and pull it out, put it into the bowl and remove the extractor from the bolt. On the extractor here, you'll notice that there's a spring and a little rubber washer. I don't recommend taking those off unless they need to be replaced, but I do examine them for any kind of damage or wear on them. They are difficult to get back onto that little nubbin. So then you'll push this back together. So that actually completes the detailed teardown of this firearm. Putting it back together, we'll just go in reverse order by putting a little pressure on the back, sliding the retainer pin into the bolt until it's flush on both sides of the bolt, grabbing the bolt assembly. On the bolt itself, you're going to notice that there's two tapers on one side and no tapers on the other side. When you slide this through and look through the cam hole, when you slide this in and look through the cam hole, you don't want the tapered side, you want the tapered side down. When you do that, you're going to put the cam pin in, again, perpendicular to the bolt assembly. Once it's in, you can turn that cam bolt, or cam pin, sorry, turn it to where it is this way. What that does is that aligns the holes for the firing pin to be slid all the way through the bolt and the bolt assembly eventually. Of course, it's magnetized now, so it's a little bit all right. Once that's in, then you can put holding the bolt with your finger and the firing pin, you can put the firing pin retainer pin back in. Once that's done, I give it a couple pulls, make sure everything's not going to fall out, and set that aside. Then I'll grab the lower, or actually I'll grab the buffer spring and the buffer and put the buffer spring back on the buffer. When you put the spring back on it, it should make a metallic noise. Like that. I'll let you know that it's locked in. And then simply slide the spring back into the buttstock, pushing down until it's retained by the pin. Setting that aside, you'll grab your upper, taking the charging handle and placing it into the groove, taking your bolt, giving it a little fling so that the bolt is actually as far forward as it can in the bolt carrier, putting that in, or putting the gas tube into the charging handle, and it should just fall straight together. Once that's done, then you can take the pins for the upper and lower. Getting these to line up is sometimes difficult. Goodness. Just going too fast here. Okay. It took longer than usual. And then that's the reassemble of the weapon, or of the firearm. Now, putting the selector on safe, squeeze the trigger, nothing should happen. Pull the charging handle to the rear a few times, make sure there's nothing that's grabbing or holding up. Selector switch to safe, squeeze the trigger, you should hear a metallic noise. Try to place the weapon back on safe, it doesn't work. Pull the charging handle to the rear, place the weapon on safe. And that completes the firearm portion. Now I want to talk about the tools that I have laid out here. So I have a rag to wipe down any tool, any parts of the firearm that need wiped down. I have a magnetic bowl to hold all of my small parts. I have the Allen wrench, which this one is a 3/16 to remove the pistol grip. I have a brush here just in case I needed it to get any buildup or any gunk off of any of the parts. And I have a couple punches here that I use. Brass one you don't want to really use for anything that's hardened, but it's still good to have one laid out just in case you need it. And the steel ones, ensure that you're wearing safety glasses whenever you're using that. And then the small mallet with the brass and the polyurethane or plastic, that's always good to have on hand. Also, I recommend having a mat that has a detailed exploded view of an AR-15, just in case you misplace something and you're kind of wondering what happened to it or where it should go when you find one. And that completes my project for this class. Thank you very much and have a good night.